The chill of that late autumn afternoon cut deeper than the wind. It settled in my bones, a cold premonition of the winter my heart was about to endure. I stood on the cracked pavement of the sidewalk, the sycamore leaves, brittle and brown, skittering around my ankles like lost thoughts. Beside me, 3 cardboard boxes and 2 worn suitcases held the tangible remnants of what I had believed to be my life, my home. The front door to the charming 2-story house on Elm Street, the house I had poured every last cent of my savings into, every last drop of my hope, clicked shut with a terrifying finality. Through the polished wood, I could still hear her voice, sharp and laced with a triumph that felt like shards of glass in my soul. "Get lost, old hag, and do not come back." Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, the woman my son, Mark, had chosen. My son. He had been there, a phantom hovering in the hallway shadows, his face averted, his shoulders slumped. He had watched his wife, her pretty face contorted with a sneer that erased any trace of its former charm, utter those words to me, his mother. He watched as she gestured for me to be gone from the house I bought, the home I had envisioned filled with warmth and future grandchildren's laughter. He had remained silent. That silence was a heavier blow than any shouted insult. After everything, every sacrifice I had made, not just for him, but for them, for their future. This was the gratitude I received. To be discarded like yesterday's news, an inconvenience swept out with the autumn leaves. But as I stood there, a tremor of something other than grief began to stir deep within me. It was a cold, hard knot of resolve. Because what they did not know, what Tiffany in her vicious, short-sighted triumph could not possibly comprehend, was that my nearly 70 years on this earth, and particularly my decades as a librarian, surrounded by the wisdom and folly of ages, had taught me a thing or two. I had learned about carefully worded passages. I had learned about binding clauses. And I had learned, most importantly, to read every line, especially the ones you pen yourself with foresight and a touch of fear. They had slammed a door, but they had no idea that years ago I had quietly installed a hidden lock of my own. If you are listening to this story, thank you so much for being here. Let us know where you are joining us from in the world, and do not forget to subscribe to become part of our growing community. It feels like a lifetime ago, that sunny afternoon when Mark first brought Tiffany home to meet me. My David, my dear husband of 42 years, had been gone for just over a year then. The silence in our little clapboard house, once filled with his gentle laughter and the scent of his pipe tobacco, was still a palpable presence, a constant ache in my chest. I was working part-time at the county library then, preparing for a retirement I had once imagined sharing with him, pottering in the garden, perhaps taking that cross-country trip we always talked about. Mark was my only child, the center of my world after David's passing. He was a good boy, or so I believed. Sensitive, a little quiet like his father, with a kind heart. He worked as a software developer, a job I did not fully understand, but knew he was good at. When he called, his voice boyish with excitement, to say he had met someone special and wanted to bring her home, my heart did a little flip of hope. Perhaps this was it, a new chapter, a chance for Mark to find the happiness David and I had shared. Tiffany was striking. Tall, blonde, with a smile that seemed to stretch a little too wide, a little too often. She was an influencer, she explained, her voice bright and carrying, full of buzzwords about brands and engagement that went straight over my head. She gushed about my little house, my antiques, my rose bushes, but her eyes, I noticed, darted around, assessing, cataloging. There was a sharpness there, an acquisitive gleam that David, with his quiet perceptiveness, would have clocked in an instant. I told myself I was being an overprotective mother, wary of any woman who might take my son. I pushed the unease down. I wanted Mark to be happy. That was all that mattered. They married the following spring, a lavish affair that Tiffany orchestrated with impressive efficiency, and, I suspected, considerable expense that Mark was likely shouldering. Soon after, the complaints began, subtle at first. Their rental apartment was too small, too noisy, not a place to build a future, Tiffany would say with a sigh, her eyes flicking towards Mark, then to me, as if I held the key to their domestic bliss. Mark, ever eager to please her, would nod in agreement, his brow furrowed with a manufactured concern. The pressure mounted, a quiet, persistent campaign. Tiffany spoke often of her friends who owned lovely homes, of the dinner parties they hosted, of the nurseries they were decorating. The implication was clear. My Mark, her husband, was falling short, and I, his mother, with my comfortable mortgage-free house and my carefully tended nest egg, was perhaps the solution. One evening, after a particularly pointed monologue from Tiffany about the importance of settling down properly, Mark approached me, his expression earnest and a little sheepish. "Mom," he began, "Tiffany and I were talking. We really want to find a house, a real home. But with property prices the way they are..." My heart ached for him, for the perceived struggle in his voice. I thought of my own David, how hard he had worked to provide for us. I thought of the security I had and the deep-seated maternal urge to smooth my child's path, to give him the best, washed over me. I was nearing full retirement. My little house, though filled with memories, was perhaps more than I needed. The idea took root, a beautiful, selfless blossom. I would help them. I would give them the start they dreamed of. "Mark, dear," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "what if I sold my house? And we could pool our resources. I mean, I could use my savings and we could buy a really nice place. For all of us." The last part, "for all of us," slipped out, a hopeful addition. Perhaps this was how I would avoid the lonely widowhood I dreaded, by becoming part of a new, vibrant family unit. Mark's face lit up. "Mom, would you really? That would be amazing." Tiffany, who had been conveniently hovering in the kitchen doorway, rushed in, her smile dazzling. "Oh, Gloria, you are an absolute angel, a real lifesaver." She hugged me, a brief, performative squeeze. And so, the decision was made. My little house, the repository of so much love and laughter, went on the market. My savings, accumulated over a lifetime of careful stewardship, were earmarked for this grand gesture. But as the plan solidified, a small, insistent voice, perhaps David's pragmatic spirit whispering in my ear, began to surface. Tiffany's enthusiasm, while infectious, also had an edge to it. Her talk was all about our new house, my entertaining space, the master suite. My role in this future idyll seemed to be diminishing in her narrative even before it began. One afternoon, while sifting through old papers, I came across an article David had saved about protecting assets in old age. It was dry, full of legal jargon, but one phrase caught my eye: reversionary interest. I called Mr. Peterson, our family lawyer for decades, a kind, methodical man with eyes that had seen much of human nature. I laid out my plan to buy the house for Mark and Tiffany. He listened patiently, his fingertips steepled. "Gloria," he said gently when I had finished, "that is an extraordinarily generous act. Truly. But love, as we know, can sometimes make us vulnerable. He then explained, in simple terms, how I could purchase the house in my name, making it clear it was my asset, while still allowing them to live there. And then he introduced the idea that had been a mere flicker in my mind, giving it form and legal weight. "We can, if you wish," he said, his gaze steady, "include a specific condition in the deed documentation, a sort of insurance policy for your heart and your home. It would state that your right to reside in the property is absolute and for your lifetime. And, should circumstances arise where that right is unjustly terminated, or you are compelled to leave against your will, then full and unencumbered ownership, along with the immediate right of possession, reverts entirely to you." A shiver went down my spine. It sounded so dramatic, so untrusting. "Oh, Mr. Peterson," I said, "I am sure it will never come to that. Mark loves me. And Tiffany, well, she is young." He smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Perhaps, Gloria. Let us hope so. But life has a way of surprising us. Consider it a piece of fine print that protects your immense generosity, a safety net you hope never to use, but will be profoundly grateful for if you do." And so we did it. The house would be in my name solely, and buried deep within the legal framework of the purchase, drafted with Mr. Peterson's meticulous care, was that clause. My secret shield. I told Mark and Tiffany that keeping it in my name for now was simply to streamline the purchase process and, for estate planning clarity given my age. They accepted this readily, Tiffany perhaps a little too quickly, her mind already on paint swatches and new furniture. She likely assumed it was a mere formality, an old lady's whim that would eventually resolve in their favor. She never asked to see the paperwork. We found it a few weeks later, a handsome two-story colonial on Elm Street with a wide porch and a mature oak tree in the front yard. It was more than I could have afforded on my own, but with the sale of my house and my savings combined, it was attainable. "It is perfect," Tiffany declared, clapping her hands. Mark beamed, relief washing over his face. "Thanks, Mom. This is everything." I signed the papers, my hands surprisingly steady. I sold my little home, packed my memories into boxes, and moved into one of the smaller upstairs bedrooms in the house on Elm Street. It was understood, a spoken agreement filled with smiles and assurances from Mark and Tiffany that this was my home now too, for as long as I wished. I had given up my independence, my sanctuary, and invested my entire financial and emotional security into this new shared venture. As I unpacked a box of David's old books in my new, smaller room, Tiffany's laughter floated up from downstairs. It sounded a little too bright, echoing in the spacious, unfamiliar rooms with an air of ownership that was already absolute in her mind. I told myself it was the sound of a happy new beginning, a fresh start for us all. But a whisper, no louder than the rustle of turning pages in an old, forgotten volume, asked if I had just written myself into a story where I might not particularly care for the ending. What would you have done in my place, with everything you owned, everything you were, riding on a grateful smile and a verbal promise? The first few months on Elm Street passed in a blur of unpacking, settling in, and navigating the new dynamics of our shared life. Tiffany was, for a while, the model of a considerate daughter-in-law. She would ask about my day, offer me cups of tea, and even solicit my opinion on curtain fabrics, though I suspected she had already made her choice. Mark seemed happy, relieved to be in a proper house, and for that, I was grateful. I tried to be useful but unobtrusive, keeping my room tidy, helping with laundry, occasionally cooking a meal, my shepherd's pie, which David and Mark had always loved. Then I officially retired from the library. My days, once structured by the quiet rhythm of books and patrons, stretched before me, long and unstructured. My presence in the house became constant, and I began to notice a subtle shift in Tiffany's demeanor. It was nothing overt, just small things. A slight pursing of her lips when I used her new high-tech coffee machine. A suggestion that perhaps I would enjoy joining a seniors walking group that met quite early, so you would be back before we are even up. My shepherd's pie, once a family favorite, was now deemed a bit heavy by Tiffany, who was on a perpetual cleanse of some sort. She started decluttering the common areas and some of my smaller, cherished possessions. A porcelain bird David had given me, a framed photo of my parents, were accidentally packed away into a box in the attic, supposedly to make space for her more contemporary aesthetic. When I gently inquired, she would wave a dismissive hand. "Oh, Gloria, those old things just do not go with the vibe we are creating here. We need a fresh start." I tried to talk to Mark. One evening, when Tiffany was out with her influencer friends, I found him in the den, scrolling through his phone. "Mark, dear," I began hesitantly, "is everything all right? Tiffany seems a little on edge lately." He barely looked up. "What do you mean, Mom?" "She is fine. Just stressed with all her projects." "Well, it is just, I feel a bit in the way sometimes," I confessed, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. He finally lowered his phone, a flicker of impatience in his eyes. "Mom, you are not in the way. Tiffany just takes some getting used to. She is very particular about her space. Just try not to upset her, okay?" "Try not to upset her." The words stung. I was the one feeling increasingly like an unwelcome guest in the house I had paid for, yet I was the one who had to tiptoe around, careful not to disturb the delicate sensibilities of my daughter-in-law. I began to spend more time in my room, the silence of my old house replaced by the muffled sounds of their life downstairs, Tiffany's loud phone calls, their music, the occasional burst of laughter that rarely included me. The armchair in the living room where I used to sit and read, a comfortable old wingback I had brought from my previous home, disappeared one afternoon. Tiffany had replaced it with a sleek, uncomfortable-looking chaise lounge. "It just opens up the room so much more, do not you think, Gloria?" she chirped, not waiting for an answer. The armchair vanished, and with it, a piece of my comfort. I knew then that this was not just about furniture. It was about space. My space. And I was taking up too much of Tiffany's. The main conflict, the one I had tried so hard to ignore, began to announce itself more boldly. Tiffany's impatience with me grew less concealed. She started making comments, often when she knew I was within earshot but pretending not to be. "Mark, we really need to have a serious talk about our future, our privacy," I heard her say one evening, her voice carrying clearly up the stairs. "This whole extended family thing, it is just not sustainable if we want to, start our own family." Start their own family. The implication hung heavy in the air. Was I the obstacle, the unwelcome third wheel preventing them from achieving their domestic dreams? Mark's responses were usually placating murmurs, too indistinct for me to decipher, but never a firm defense of my presence. Never a reminder to his wife that I was not just some inconvenient lodger. His weakness, his inability to stand up for me, or even just to mediate with fairness, was a constant, dull ache. Then came the financial complaints. "Mark, the utility bills are through the roof this month," Tiffany would announce at the dinner table, her eyes flicking pointedly in my direction. And groceries? It is like feeding an army. Despite the fact that I contributed from my modest pension towards household expenses, and had, of course, provided the house itself free and clear, I was now being subtly cast as a financial drain. She suggested I should look into getting a small part-time job, just to keep busy, Gloria, and maybe help out a little more. The atmosphere in the house grew thick with unspoken resentments, primarily Tiffany's, and a pervasive, suffocating dread that settled upon me. My mail sometimes went missing for a day or two, only to turn up in odd places. Invitations to join them for an outing became rare, then non-existent. I was an island in their bustling sea, increasingly isolated. Then came the day Tiffany orchestrated what she called the talk. I was summoned to the living room, the one now dominated by her sterile modern furniture. Mark sat on the edge of the new chaise lounge, looking pale and avoiding my gaze. Tiffany sat opposite me, on a stiff, unwelcoming chair, a folder clutched in her lap as if this were a business meeting. "Gloria," she began, her voice infused with a saccharine sweetness that set my teeth on edge. "Mark and I have been doing a lot of thinking about our future, about what we need as a couple." She paused, for dramatic effect, I presumed. "And we have come to the conclusion that, for us to really grow and, well, to be truly happy, we need our own space." I stared at her, my heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. "Our own space?" I echoed, my voice barely a whisper. "Yes," she continued, her tone becoming cooler, more clinical. "It is not personal, Gloria. It is just this arrangement. It is not working out for us anymore. We feel stifled. We need to be independent." She opened the folder, which contained, I saw with a sickening lurch, brochures for several local retirement communities and assisted living facilities. "We thought perhaps it is time for you to find a place of your own, something more suited to your needs." I looked at Mark, my son. His eyes were fixed on a point on the floor, his knuckles white as he gripped his knees. He said nothing, not a word. The silence from him was an amputation. Stunned, heartbroken, a wave of dizzying disbelief washed over me. This was not happening. This could not be happening. But Tiffany's cool, expectant gaze, Mark's cowardly silence, told me it was. And in that moment of profound shock, something else began to stir deep within me. Beneath the pain, beneath the betrayal, a cold, hard kernel of clarity began to form. The image of Mr. Peterson's kind, knowing smile flashed in my mind. The memory of his words, "A safety net you hope never to use." I drew a slow, shaky breath. I would not break down in front of them. I would not give Tiffany the satisfaction. My voice, when I finally spoke, was surprisingly steady, devoid of the tears that were scalding the back of my throat. "I see." I paused, then met Tiffany's gaze directly. "And when would you like me to leave the house that I bought for you both?" Tiffany seemed momentarily taken aback by my composure, perhaps expecting hysterics, pleading. She recovered quickly. "Well, we thought, perhaps in a month. That should give you enough time to make arrangements." A month. 30 days to dismantle my life again, to find a new refuge, to absorb the enormity of their callousness. I nodded slowly, my gaze unwavering. "A month it is." The mask of the doting, self-sacrificing mother had begun to crack, and what lay beneath was something they had never seen, something I had almost forgotten was there. Gloria Stern, the survivor, the woman who knew the value of words, both spoken and written. The battle lines had been drawn, not by me, but by them. and they had no idea of the defenses I held in reserve. The month that followed was a blur of quiet desperation and mounting humiliation. I began the demoralizing search for affordable housing. On my fixed retirement income, the options were bleak. Tiny, depressing apartments in undesirable neighborhoods, or sterile rooms in facilities that felt more like waiting rooms for the inevitable than places to live. Each viewing was a fresh stab of shame, a stark reminder of my sudden, unwanted vulnerability. Tiffany, meanwhile, made no effort to conceal her impatience. "Found anything yet, Gloria?" she would ask brightly each morning, her tone implying that my continued presence was a personal affront. She ramped up her campaign to make my existence in the house unbearable. She started playing loud, thumping music during the day, music she knew I disliked. She would have long, animated phone conversations with her friends, clearly audible in my room, discussing her plans for reclaiming the house and how much freer they would be once I was gone. Brochures for the most depressing assisted living facilities began to appear on my nightstand or tucked into my books. My few remaining items in the common areas, a shawl I sometimes left on the sofa, my favorite mug in the kitchen, were unceremoniously moved to my room as if to erase any trace of my existence beyond its four walls. The refrigerator became a battleground. Food I bought for myself would mysteriously disappear or be pushed to the back, replaced by Tiffany's endless array of obscure health foods. I tried, one last time, to appeal to Mark. I found him alone in the garden, ostensibly weeding, though he looked more like he was trying to escape the oppressive atmosphere indoors. My heart ached as I looked at him. This son I had adored, now a stranger complicit in my exile. "Mark," I began, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "Mark, please. How can you let this happen? After everything, your father and I, we gave you everything we could. This house." I gestured vaguely, tears welling. "I bought this house for your happiness, for your future. I never imagined." He flinched, his shoulders hunching. He could not meet my eyes. "Mom," he mumbled, his voice thick with a guilt that offered me no comfort. "Mom, please try to understand. Tiffany, she is my wife. This is what she wants. We just need our own life, our own space. It is for the best." "For the best?" I whispered, the words like stones in my throat. "For whose best, Mark? Certainly not mine." He raked a hand through his hair, his face a mask of misery and weakness. "I am sorry, Mom, I truly am, but it is decided." That was the final cut. The bond, already frayed and strained, snapped. He had made his choice. He had chosen Tiffany, chosen her desires over his mother's well-being, over basic decency. The love I had felt for him, so boundless and unconditional, shriveled into a cold, aching disappointment. The dreaded day arrived, a gray, blustery morning that mirrored the turmoil in my soul. Tiffany was a whirlwind of barely concealed glee, directing two burly young men she had hired to move my remaining belongings. My boxes, hastily packed with shaking hands, were carried out and dumped unceremoniously onto the curb. Mark made a brief, shamefaced appearance, muttered a barely audible, "Sorry, Mom," then retreated back into the house, unable to witness the full extent of his wife's cruelty and his own spinelessness. As the last box thudded onto the pavement, Tiffany emerged onto the porch, her arms crossed, a smug, proprietary air about her. She surveyed me, her expression a mixture of contempt and triumph. And then she delivered the parting shot, the words that would etch themselves into my memory with acid. "Get lost, old hag, and do not come back. Take your dusty memories with you." The door slammed shut with a resounding thud, the sound echoing the closing of a massive steel vault on my heart. I stood there, alone on the sidewalk, the wind whipping my hair around my face, the curious eyes of neighbors peeking from behind their curtains. The humiliation was a physical weight, crushing me. Discarded, ejected, an old hag with dusty memories. Somehow I managed to call a taxi. I directed the driver to the only place I could think of, a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, a place I had seen advertised with weekly rates. The room was small, smelled of stale cigarettes and despair, and the bedspread was a faded, depressing floral. As I sank onto the lumpy mattress, the full weight of my situation crashed down upon me. I was homeless, betrayed by my own son, insulted and cast out by a woman whose every comfort I had provided. Tears I had refused to shed in front of them now flowed freely, hot, bitter tears of grief, rage, and a profound, bottomless sorrow. Was this it? Was this my reward for a life of love, of sacrifice, of trying to do the right thing? The night was endless, filled with the ghosts of happier times, the sharp contrast of my present misery making them all the more painful. I felt foolish, used, and utterly, devastatingly alone. I must have drifted into an exhausted, troubled sleep. When I awoke, gray morning light was seeping through the thin curtains. My body ached, my eyes were swollen, and my spirit felt bruised to its very core. I looked at my reflection in the cracked mirror above the chipped formica dresser, a tired old woman, defeated and lost. For a moment, the despair threatened to engulf me again. But then, something shifted. Perhaps it was the sheer injustice of it all. Perhaps it was the memory of David's quiet strength, or the countless heroines I had encountered in the pages of the books that had been my life's companions. A flicker of defiance, then a spark of anger, not the hot, useless anger of yesterday, but a cold, clear, righteous anger began to burn within me. I was Gloria Stern. I was a survivor. I had faced loss before and found my way through, and I was not, by any means, without resources. I remembered Mr. Peterson's calm voice, the carefully crafted words on that deed, my secret weapon. The librarian in me, the woman who believed in order, in justice, in the power of the written word, stirred. My despair began to recede, replaced by a steely resolve. They had played their hand. Now it was my turn. I sat up, smoothed my wrinkled clothes, and reached for the motel telephone. My hand was surprisingly steady as I dialed Mr. Peterson's office number. When his calm, familiar voice came on the line, I spoke. My own voice clear and firm, devoid of the tremor I had feared. "Mr. Peterson, please. It is Gloria Stern." I paused, taking a deep breath. I believe the conditions of the addendum we discussed some years ago regarding the property on Elm Street have now been fully and unequivocally met. It is time to proceed. There was a brief silence on the other end. Then Mr. Peterson's voice, tinged with a gentle sorrow, but also a quiet readiness. "Gloria, I am so very sorry it has come to this. Deeply sorry. But yes, I have all the documentation here. We are ready when you are." I thanked him and hung up the phone. A grim, almost cold satisfaction settled over me. Mark and Tiffany had enjoyed their brief, ugly reign. They had relished their power, their cruelty. They thought they were closing a chapter, casting me out of their story. They had no idea that I was the author of the entire book, and I had written a very specific, legally binding ending for this particular, painful section. They thought they had the last word. But they had not read the epilogue, the one I had penned with foresight and a mother's broken heart years ago. My meeting with Mr. Peterson took place the following afternoon in his quiet, book-lined office. It felt like a sanctuary, a bastion of order and reason after the chaos and emotional turmoil of the preceding weeks. He greeted me with his customary gentle courtesy, his eyes full of a compassion that did not need words. He had the file on his desk, the relevant documents already laid out. "Gloria," he said, his voice soft but firm, "I have reviewed everything. The clause is ironclad. Your foresight, however painful its necessity, was impeccable." He explained the process clearly. He had already drafted the formal legal notice. It stated, in unequivocal terms, the immediate reversion of title for the Elm Street property to me, Gloria Stern, due to the breach of the conditions under which I had allowed Mark and Tiffany to reside there. It also included a formal demand for them to vacate the premises within 30 days from the date of service. I read through the documents, my librarian's eye scanning each word. It was all there, just as we had planned. My hand was firm as I signed where Mr. Peterson indicated. There was a deep, aching sadness within me, a mourning for the relationship with my son that was now irrevocably broken. But overlaying it was a sense of grim determination, of justice about to be served. This was not about revenge in the heated sense. It was about reclamation, about restoring a balance that had been so cruelly overturned. 2 days later, a registered process server, a stoic-looking man in a plain suit, delivered a crisp legal envelope to the house on Elm Street. I imagined the scene. Tiffany, perhaps in the middle of planning a celebratory housewarming party now that the old hag was gone, would have taken the envelope with casual indifference. Her expression, as she read the stark, legalistic prose, would have shifted from nonchalance to confusion, then to dawning disbelief, and finally to sheer, unadulterated horror. Mark, arriving home from work, would have walked into a scene of hysteria, his wife thrusting the papers at him, her voice shrill with panic. Immediate reversion of title, full ownership and right of possession. Vacate premises within 30 days. The words would have leapt off the page, stark and terrifying. The carefully constructed artifice of their life, built upon my generosity and their callous entitlement, was about to shatter. They would realize, with a sickening lurch, that Gloria, the quiet, unassuming mother and mother-in-law they had so easily dismissed and discarded, had held all the cards all along. The house was not, and had never truly been, theirs to control or to give away. It was mine, protected by a clause they had never bothered to investigate, a testament to a prudence they had fatally underestimated. Within hours, my phone, which I had kept on silent, began to fill with desperate voicemails. Mark's voice, choked with panic, and a belated, hollow-sounding remorse. "Mom, Mom, please pick up. There has been a terrible mistake. We need to talk. This cannot be happening." Then Tiffany's, a torrent of hysterical, insincere apologies and pleas. "Gloria, darling, please, we did not mean it. It was a misunderstanding. We love you. We can work this out. Please, you have to call us back." I listened to a few, then deleted them. On Mr. Peterson's sage advice, I made no direct contact. He became my shield, my spokesman. When they called his office, as they inevitably did, his secretary politely informed them that all communication must be in writing, addressed to him. His formal reply to their frantic, rambling letter was brief and to the point. "Mrs. Stern's decision is final. The terms of the legally binding agreement are clear and non-negotiable. Your clients have 30 days to vacate the property. The 30 days that followed must have been a living nightmare for them. The life they had so smugly envisioned, free of me in their house, was dissolving before their eyes. I imagined their frantic scrambles to find alternative accommodation, the bitter arguments, the recriminations. Tiffany would undoubtedly blame Mark for not handling his mother better, for not ensuring the house was securely in their names. Mark, consumed by guilt and the dawning realization of his profound folly, would have sunk deeper into misery. On the 30th day, as stipulated, Mr. Peterson and I arrived at Elm Street. A battered-looking moving truck was parked haphazardly at the curb, its rear doors open, revealing a jumble of their possessions. The lawn, once neatly kept, was trampled and strewn with discarded items. The house itself looked diminished, its charm obscured by the chaos of their departure. Tiffany was there, her face pale and tight with fury, her eyes shooting venomous darts at me. She muttered something unintelligible but clearly insulting as I walked past her up the porch steps. Mark stood near the truck, his shoulders slumped, the picture of defeat. He looked older, haggard. He opened his mouth as if to speak, his eyes pleading, "Mom, I met his gaze, not with anger, not with triumph, but with a cool, profound disappointment that I knew would wound him more than any words. I simply looked past him, towards the front door of my house. Mr. Peterson, ever the professional, stepped forward. "Mr. Stern, Mrs. Stern, we are here to take possession of the property as per the legal notice. Do you have the keys?" Tiffany practically threw a set of keys at Mr. Peterson's feet. He bent, retrieved them without comment, and then, with a new set he produced from his briefcase, a locksmith who had arrived with us began the process of changing the locks. The sound of the drill, the click of the new tumblers falling into place, was the sweetest music I had heard in a very long time. It was the sound of restoration, of my life, my property, my dignity being firmly secured. Once they had driven away in the rumbling truck, their faces a mixture of rage and despair, Mr. Peterson and I stepped inside. The house was a mess, furniture askew, dust everywhere, a faint, unpleasant odor in the air. It was as if their inner turmoil had manifested in the physical space. But it was my house again, truly mine. I took a slow walk through the empty rooms, a silent farewell to the painful dream that had died there, but also a quiet, powerful affirmation of my victory. I had not just reclaimed a house, I had reclaimed myself. In the weeks that followed, life began to move with a surprising efficiency. On my instructions, Mr. Peterson listed the Elm Street property for sale immediately. Free of occupants and priced fairly, it sold within a month to a young family who seemed genuinely thrilled with its charm. The closing was smooth, and a substantial sum of money, representing my life savings and then some, was deposited into my bank account. It did not bring elation, not exactly. What I felt was a quiet sense of rightness, of accounts settled, of a heavy burden lifted. News of Mark and Tiffany trickled back to me, as such things often do in towns where people know people. I heard they had been forced to rent a small, dingy apartment in a less desirable part of town, a far cry from the spacious comfort of Elm Street. Tiffany, stripped of the status and lifestyle she had so desperately craved, was reportedly beside herself with bitterness, constantly berating Mark for their downfall. Mark, I was told, was despondent, struggling to cope with the financial strain and the crushing weight of his guilt and regret. Their beautiful dream, built on such ugly foundations, had crumbled into dust. I did not seek out this news, nor did I revel in it. There was a distant sadness for the son I had loved, the boy he once was, but no regret for the actions I had been forced to take. They were living with the consequences of their own greed and cruelty. Justice, I found, did not always need to be loud and vengeful. Sometimes it was simply the inevitable outcome of choices made. With the proceeds from the sale, I began to research my own future, a future defined by my desires, not by the needs or expectations of others. I remembered a brochure I had idly picked up years ago for a seaside retirement community a few hours down the coast. It had seemed like an impossible dream then, something for other people. Now, it was within my reach. I found a lovely, bright condominium there, smaller than Elm Street, but perfect for me. It had a wide balcony that overlooked the sparkling ocean, and the scent of salt and freedom was always in the air. I bought it outright. No mortgages, no complications, no sharing. It was mine. I furnished it slowly, choosing each piece with care, things that brought me joy, not things chosen to impress or appease. I brought out the few cherished mementos that had survived Tiffany's purges: my porcelain bird, the photo of my parents, David's favorite reading lamp, and gave them places of honor. My new life unfolded with a gentle, surprising grace. I joined a book club where discussions were lively and opinions respected. I started a walking group with a witty, retired teacher named Sarah, and our morning strolls along the beach, accompanied by the cry of gulls and the rhythm of the waves, became a cherished ritual. I even took a pottery class, something I had always wanted to try, and found a quiet satisfaction in shaping clay with my own hands. Sometimes, sitting on my balcony with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of rose and gold, I would think back to that awful afternoon on the sidewalk, the sting of Tiffany's words, the desolation in my heart. It felt like a scene from a distant play, a lifetime ago, involving a character I barely recognized anymore. The dusty memories Tiffany had mocked were still with me, of course, but they were now woven into a richer, stronger tapestry, one that included resilience, wisdom, and a hard-won peace. They no longer dictated my present happiness. I learned that the hardest chains to break are sometimes the ones we allow others to place upon us, often out of love or a misplaced sense of duty. But I also learned that foresight, quiet intelligence, and a well-drafted legal document can be powerful shields. Dignity, once reclaimed, shines brighter than any material possession. It is truly never too late to rewrite your own story, to script your own happy ending, even if sometimes you have to be the one to add a very firm, non-negotiable clause to do it. My home now is not just bricks and mortar, not just a beautiful view. It is a testament to survival, built on foundations of peace, self-respect, and the beautiful, quiet strength of knowing my own enduring worth. And that, I have found, is the most valuable asset of all. Thank you for walking this path with me today. Sharing Gloria's story, which is my story, has been a reminder that even in our most difficult moments, when we feel most alone and undervalued, we often possess inner resources and strengths we might not even be aware of. If her journey, my journey, touched your heart or resonated with your own experiences, please consider subscribing to our channel, give this video a like, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We cherish our community here and have many more stories of courage, resilience, and well-earned justice to bring you. We look forward to seeing you in the next one. Goodbye for now.